The way to get out of this mess and the way to resolve the political balkanization and the rise of right-wing extremism is going to require a deprogramming that is not going to, it's going to require a broader deprogramming that accesses the core of what's driving people into these communities at higher and higher rates, right?
Okay.
And that it's not.
We'll give this a quick rating, okay? All right, I think that's true. You do need to find a way to deprogram and de-radicalize people on the far right by addressing or at least acknowledging some core cultural problems they have that you can relate to. I agree with that. I've advocated for that my whole time here.
Not necessarily going to be about saying you're racist and you're bad, even if that's 100% true, but that it's going to be about figuring out what compels an individual to find.
This is the Chad cam angle, by the way, okay? What Briahna and I are doing right now is the Virgin professional camera setup versus the Chad just pressing your face into the laptop camera, you know?
More solace in white supremacy than another kind of community. And so I wonder, I wonder what your thoughts are on that as a leftist. You know, is there an incompatibility with wanting to do have a broad multiracial coalition and a kind of insistence? I mean, you're dealing with a really narrow extreme part of the country. So I don't want to say that every conservative or every Trump voter is implicated in this conversation. But, you know, do you ever feel like there is a tension between kind of the need to coalition build and a perception of a certain segment of society as kind of untouchable?
I don't feel that tension.
So, to be clear, what Briahna is essentially saying right now is, do we think there's a contrast between, being tolerant of minority groups and opening ourselves up to people on the right? That's basically what she's saying, right? Essentially, do we think that being, very inclusionary of minorities limits our ability to reach out to these groups? I don't think there's anything wrong with asking these questions fundamentally, but it's the way in which they're asked and how they're answered that matters.
I understand that other people do. I'm in the Punch a Nazi School of Applied Mechanics.
Sure.
I have no sympathy for these people. And it's not just at a personal peak, you know, because people talk about deprogramming, de-radicalization. Every time I give a book talk, 4 or 5 of the questions are about, can't we just kumbaya, de-radicalize? And you have no idea what goes into de-radicalization. Genuinely, de-radicalization, this magical term that people use constantly, is a years-long process, requires, you know, people to be mentally ready to leave. It's analogous to quitting smoking. It's fucking hard. You know, and sometimes people might want to kill you for leaving, you know, and so you have to be really fucking ready to leave. And most people don't want to. They enjoy it. They enjoy the cruelty. They enjoy the camaraderie. They feel community. They feel acceptance, right? So I think, so if you're willing to engage in a years-long emotional connection of extraordinary strength to the point where I've heard of people marrying their de-radicalizers or spending years having dinner with their de-radicalizers only to eventually maybe arrive at a sort of tenuous former status. You know, if you're prepared to do that, fine, that's not scalable. What is scalable is saying these sentiments are unacceptable.
So a couple of points here. Nothing that she's saying here is necessarily wrong, but she's referring explicitly to people who are in far-right movements. She's not talking about 14-year-olds on 8chan. She's not talking about, Twitter groypers who were ANCOMs yesterday and will be ANCAPs tomorrow. She's talking about people who are in far-right movements, you know? You can see it in what she's referring to here, that, that sometimes people will kill you for leaving these movements. That can be true if you're in far-right movements. Nobody's tracking down rando Twitter accounts. Well, sometimes that happens, but not in the way she's referring to here. So what she's saying right now, her experience with the process of de-radicalizing the right is super different from mine. When I talk about de-radicalizing the right, I'm just talking about challenging their arguments, making fun of them, and sometimes they hate watch me, and then eventually they get a little more chill with my arguments, and they're like, okay, well, Vosh is a commie loser, fat, gay, but he's like funny, and then they watch it for a few more weeks, and they're like, oh, okay, and then like maybe eventually they like move over to the left a little. That's what I'm talking about when I refer to de-radicalizing, which is a broad, scaled up process. What she's referring to is getting at the worst of the worst people. People who aren't just like random online far-right types, but full-on members of far-right militant groups or stuff like that, which if those people will not be moved over by my content. If you're far right enough that you're part of like the Proud Boys, you're probably not going to have your mind changed by like being exposed to a leftist YouTuber, you know? So nothing she's saying is wrong. We're coming at this from two different angles, though.
You cannot show up in my town. You cannot show up in my university. I think that many people want to kumbaya because for them, the prospect of like standing up and like fucking punching a Proud Boy is uncomfortable, and they want to see themselves as more tolerant. And like, I mean, for me at least, I'm like, cool, your conception of yourself as tolerant and marketplace of ideas-y and willing to coalition build, whatever, like matters more to you than my safety and the safety of like all the marginalized people that these people attack. Like I really, if I sound angry, it's because I'm an angry person. I'm also quitting smoking, and also fuck a Nazi. Like fuck them.
Okay,
I don't care about them.
I've talked about this before. I don't think there's anything morally wrong with like self-defense against far-right groups or whatever. I just don't know how much you actually protect the minorities in your community by exacerbating that sort of thing, you know? This is like a highly contextual thing. It really matters on a ton of incredibly specific subpoints, but historically, a lot of far-right movements have been emboldened with their ranks increasing in size based on the media they're able to produce from violent clashes between themselves and anti-fascists. Sometimes the best way to fight them is to wait for them to strike you first, because when you do that, it unambiguously, well, not unambiguously, but it does make the media much more favorable toward you. Not 100%, not all the time, but in some respects, in some cases, it definitely leans things more in your favor. Sometimes ignoring them can be better. But obviously, self-defense is the sacred right of us fine Americans, you know? So
I don't care about their lives. I want them to die. Like I really am just like I have no patience. No patience. Like,
So Talia,
she means in a video game Twitch, of course. Thank you.
the more we socially marginalize these views, the more we make them unacceptable, the fewer people will join. If you deplatform someone, if you play whack-a-mole enough, like you make it annoying and difficult, you dox people, you get them their jobs lost for holding these views publicly, for saying that they want to burn Jews and kill, you know, N-words. You make it socially absolutely poison to do these things.
so is there evidence of that, Talia? Is there evidence that that approach? Because you say, you know,
There is. Yeah. When you make being a thing suck, people are less likely to be that thing. Yeah, for the most part. At the very least, there's tons of evidence on being deplatformed being an effective way of silencing people. Who's heard of Stefan Molyneux lately, right? That stuff, I mean, there's hard evidence on that. I doubt there's been any evidence on, like, doxing or whatever. But at the very least, at, like, lower levels, when it comes to, like, making life inconvenient for people of any political affiliation, that definitely moves people over. Social shaming can work as well, yeah. But it's kind of complicated the way that works too. So, for example, you know how people used to say the N-word all the time, like in the 50s, but now they don't, they stopped saying it that much after the civil rights movement, you know what I mean? Like they kind of stopped saying that as much, you know what I mean? Just generally. They talked about this with the Southern strategy, like you can't say the N-word anymore, but you can say the N-word like through dog whistling, you know? Like Fox News says thugs, right? That's basically, they're saying the N-word, they're just not saying the N-word. You know what I mean? Sometimes supplanting certain types of behavior only makes the people who express it better at dog whistling. And I don't know how much that helps necessarily. So it can be really difficult to, find out how much is socially discouraging this behavior, reducing it, and how much of it is just making them better at hiding it. I'm not entirely sure. There's tough questions to answer.
you say that the approach you're describing is scalable, and the de-radicalization approach isn't. But what strikes me is that it seems like there has been a radicalization approach that has been taking years. The radicalizers are happy to take years and pursue this project, and that they have been able to scale it at a significant degree. That in some ways, and we've talked about the Powell memo on the show a lot, but it's this, famous memo by soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, where he set out an agenda for the Conservative Party in the 1970s and said, well, look, we're losing the culture wars. This is how we fix it. And it was 30 years before Fox News, which was one of the goals of the Powell memo, a right-wing news organization, manifested. And, we're just now seeing the apotheosis of their efforts to take the Supreme Court.
Did I just hold on?
In this party in the 1970s and said, well, look, we're losing the culture wars. This is how we fix it. And it was 30 years before Fox News, which was one of the goals of the Powell memo, a right-wing news organization, manifested. And, we're just now seeing the apotheosis of their efforts to take the Supreme Court and all of this stuff, right? And that they're...
Okay, I understand what she's saying. She's talking about how the effort to propagate far-right cultural victories were sort of laid out for some time beforehand, and that the implementation of Fox News is a component to that sort of bore fruit later on. Okay, yeah, I get it.
There is a way that the long game, I think, while frustrating and not as instantly gratifying, is very effective. On the other hand, I'm concerned about what it means to say something like, we don't let them into our towns, we don't let them into our universities. Just on a logistical level, I don't know what that even begins to look like. And so I am skeptical about the idea that in and of itself could be scalable.
It really depends on what you mean by we don't let them in. I that's like a super vague thing that can mean a lot of shit. If you mean like, we will protest against Proud Boys literally marching through the university campus, then like, okay. Do we mean like, do we mean like the schools like try to investigate every student's internet histories? There are a lot of ways you could go with that. Hold on.
You're completely entitled to your skepticism. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, the Lavin memo then is a 30-year long plan of fuck like racism and make it unacceptable, make it pariah, make it like throw it onto an island and an ice flow, and do that through physical violence and through everything from physical violence to doxing to public protest. You use every tool at your disposal. And no, I have no interest. I have no interest in building a coalition with these people. And you may, but the less attractive you can make these ideas seem. To bring back the smoking, analogy, fewer people smoke because you can't smoke in a movie theater. Fewer people smoke because you can't smoke in a bar. Fewer people smoke because you have to stand on a street corner and feel like shit. So let's make it like that.
What was it that?
Well, that's a little bit different because with the smoking stuff, we're talking about the implementation of law, right? I don't know if it would work if there were like marauding anti-smoking gangs would like beat people up for smoking near a restaurant. You know what I mean? Those are two like different things. There's a pretty big difference between like the weight of the law stamping down on a type of behavior and people trying to sort of mobilize their community to step in place of the law.
Made you at this point decide to quit smoking?
I've been running and I wanted to be able to run more.
Thanks.
So it wasn't that people kind of harangued you and said smoking is bad.
Oh, that helped. That helped.
But I presume that people have been saying that sort of thing since whatever it was you started smoking. It's bad for your health, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, listen, like, I don't think that I'm going to be able to convince you. I think if you want to, like, hold hands with a, Nazi and kiss them gently on the cheek, that's fine. I just don't think that's going to work out well for you.
I don't think that's a fair characterization of Briahna's point here.
Do you think that what I'm arguing for is that I Briahna Joy Gray, who was sitting before you as a Black woman, wants to hold hands with Nazis and kiss them in the street?
I do not respect the id poll counterattack from Briahna Joy Gray. However, I still think that was a pretty bad faith attack from Talia.
I'm not trying to debate you at all here. I'm trying to explore what I think are some tensions that I too am wrestling with, and I would hope.
Oh, because it's the bad faith pod. Okay, so they both have to do this. Okay, I get that.
That since we're both members of this group, of these groups that certainly see no benefit in appeasing Nazis, that we can have a conversation that doesn't presume that where we're coming from is because of some natural sympathy with these groups, as opposed to genuinely trying to strategize about how to fix this problem that we very much agree on, which is that America is being increasingly radicalized in these extremist.
I agree with what Briahna Joy Gray is saying right now, by the way. The strategizing is really, really important. You can say a lot of stuff that sounds really good on paper, but unfortunately, the broader project of moving the direction of the culture in your favor is something that takes a lot of like effort and forethought. You know what I mean? Or to put it another way, like, guys, has the right in America, like the modern right, would it benefit if they started holding Klan rallies again? I'm gonna go ahead and say probably not. I mean, it'd be terrifying for some people in some communities for a short time, but if Klan rallies resurged right now, that would be decades of hate fuel for the rest of the world to crank down on, you know? Now imagine if there are people in the far right being like, we need to do Klan rallies again. Those worked 100 years ago. Yeah, like, nowadays it would optically destroy them, but they strategize a bit better than that. Sometimes they fuck up and do Charlottesville, which was a universal like hit to them. Sometimes they fuck up and do January 6th, which was a universal hit to them. You know what I mean? Sometimes they forget to strategize and they end up inviting an unbelievable amount of social derision because they take the mask off, you know? And it's important to be careful with these considerations. I want to see how this goes, actually. I'd only seen clips of this interview on Twitter in which, and I am very biased, I don't like Briahna Joy Gray at all. I really dislike her. But listening to this now, so far, I'm more gripped by this interview than I expected to be. So let's continue watching.
I feel like I've stated my position repeatedly, and then I don't quite know how to react other than like to respond other than like, no, I really believe what I believe. Like I really think like that stigmatization, that pariah, dumb, that physical confrontation, that, you know, I think people think that they're too cool for anti-fascism. People think anti-fascism is lame. People think that,
is that a thought people on the left,
you know, it's gauche. It's not enough. Yes, of course I believe that like we should have Medicare for all, that we should have social like safety net policies, that we shouldn't like leave people to be deprived, alone, like to feel like these senses of loss and like, you know, the elements of vulnerability to radicalization are like very common human emotions. Is feeling lost, is feeling lonely, is feeling purposeless, and like, you know, everything we can do to
this statement feels a little purposeless.
Mitigate those feelings in such large masses of the population, like that's great. I think there are many constructive things you can do to fight Nazism that don't involve like, you know, brass knuckling up and like just flattening the nose of a Proud Boy. But like, I think you have to be willing to brass knuckle up and flatten the nose of a Proud Boy too. Like
I don't like this answer because Briahna Joy Gray essentially said that she wants to strategize, and the response from Talia was, strategize all you want, you still have to do this thing. But that wasn't really what Briahna was saying, right? Briahna, because the specifics here like really, really, really matter. The whole like levying everything down to flattening the nose of a Proud Boy, there are a trillion considerations surrounding it that need to be made. Is it in self-defense, or are you initiating? Follow-up. Do you really think you're making your community safer if there are Proud Boys at an event and you run up and punch first? Does that actually help your cause? Because the guy who gets punched isn't going to be like discouraged and go home after. That guy is going to be a hero in their community. That guy is going to be like the guy who took the first bullet to start whatever fucking full-on fist fight happens afterwards. That guy's going to be the martyr that spurns days of media attention. So I don't know if that necessarily, I mean, you could kill them, in which case, in addition to whatever ethical considerations you have about just bringing guns to protests, is massively disruptive to you and everyone else in a million ways. In fact, I think because there are people in my community who probably don't understand this, here's why you should never, ever in a million years bring guns to a protest. First of all, you just shouldn't shoot people. That's one. That's a big one. I'm sorry, even if they're like super far right, I just judge, jury, and executionering yourself for that. I mean, if you're just initiating violence, I mean, Jesus. Yeah. Second of all, if you bring a gun to a protest, congratulations, you've made you and everyone around you fair targets for cops, okay? If you bring a gun to your protest, not only are you making yourself open to counter violence and like police violence, everyone around you. You guys remember back from Black Lives Matter, there was that clip from Seattle where one of the BLM protesters grabbed a gun from a car that had its windows broken in, and he was just sort of holding this like rifle, and then a bodyguard of a local journalist ran up to him, shoved him away, and took the gun. That bodyguard was right. If you're just open carrying a gun at a protest, the likelihood of violence taking place against you and the people around you is massively higher, especially when you fucking fire it. And third of all, dude, holy shit, just even if you ignore the ethics of the situation and the violence that could be done to you and around you, like, holy fuck, that's bad optics. Like, ignore the ethics if you want to. It's bad on everything. It's bad on every element, like every consideration you could fathom. It's bad safety-wise, ethics-wise, and optics-wise. It's like the perfect trifecta of bad decision-making. That's not to say there aren't specific and targeted instances of effective open carry protests, like what the Black Panther Party's done outside of courts sometimes, you know, like courthouses and stuff. The difference is that the Black Panther Party was organized. They had leaders and training. People were told to be in specific places at specific times. Every person there at those protests who had a gun knew how to use that gun, and had talked with people above them in station who ordered them not to use it except under certain circumstances. There's a big difference between that and just like incoherently bringing guns to a protest. Just be careful about that stuff, okay? If I ever go to a protest and I see somebody next to me has a gun, I'm leaving the protest. And you guys should too, all right? Because you should not let some dumb fuck with dreams of being the fucking revolutionary catalyst put you and other people around you in harm's way. Would you support something like the SRA holding a pro-gun rally? Yeah, in the proper context, carrying at a protest could be fine. It depends on whether you expect there to be violence there. Where do you think the pushback's going to come from? How well trained are people? What's the attitude? What's the mood? The BLM protests, like most civil rights protests, are angry. People get angry at civil rights protests. Angry people shouldn't be holding guns. The Black Panther Party were cool, calm, and collected. That was their whole fucking thing, okay? They were cool as hell. They were wicked as shit, you know? They were wicked sick. Vosh, it's not like Antifa will be treated well by cops without guns. Sure, dude. This is such a stupid fucking argument. I'm like, hey, Vosh, like, the cops already don't like us. So, like, what's the difference if we just bring guns? So, like, I don't know, dude. Bring a thermonuclear weapon, okay? You're right. They already dislike you. Like, this is a child's argument. Like, you know, like you go into a classroom and you're like, well, Mrs. Kerbopple already dislikes me, so she won't mind if I take a shit on like a desk, you know? My parents are already angry at me, so lighting this room on fire won't make a difference. Like, just don't, yeah. Mrs. Kerbopple, isn't that from Jimmy Neutron? Wasn't it Jimmy Neutron? Wait, Jimmy Neutron teacher. Miss Fowl? Oh. I have a very distinct memory of these being switched, with Miss Fowl being the Simpsons teacher and Mrs. Kerbopple being the... Oh, okay. Well. Anyway.
There is no space for coalitional politics with these people, to my mind.
So one of the, I think, parts of the book that I found to be really interesting was when you were talking about how banal many of these individuals were when you were talking to them on the websites and the dating site, right? And how the banality of their lives was abutting these like really horrific belief systems. And he would go from talking about, you know, casually, oh, I'm making my pork and bean dinner or whatever, to, you know, Jews, let's kill them. Am I right? You know?
Yeah, or like, let's talk about the, you know, N-words.
Yeah. So I remember when I was, you know, reading that section, you know, you explained that the banality almost made you feel less empathy for these people. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of emotional reaction you had to being that close and in those intimate spaces and having these people trust you in that way with these incredibly ugly parts of their lives?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, so you'll see so often in journalism about Nazis, this shock that they're people. Like, it's there was an infamous sort of New York Times profile of Tony Hoveder.
I'm sorry, did I miss something weird? I was reading YouTube chat for some stupid reason. What happened? I don't know. It's probably fine.
Who's a, pretty well-known white supremacist. Was like, oh my God, like, he has a wife and a house, and like he made dinner, and like, he didn't, like, I don't know, jizz a swastika onto the wall while making pasta. Like, I mean, it's that level of parodic, like, oh my God, Nazis are people too. And I'm like, of course they're people. You start with the presumption that they're people with whole lives, with moral universes as complex and wild as yours and mine. And like, you start with the assumption that these are ordinary people. And then you see what these ordinary people have dedicated their lives to. And if that doesn't make you fucking mad, it makes me fucking mad.
Yeah, so
it doesn't absolve.
So it is correct that you should always, this is the banality of evil. The idea that Nazis are like these superhumanly evil creatures is really dumb, and it leads to a lot of really bad political action, including, by the way, the propagation of Nazi ideology. Nobody thinks they're super duper mega evil, so when they start repeating white nationalist talking points, they don't think they could be anywhere near a Nazi because they're not evil. In reality, the tenets of Nazism, along with the tenets of almost any other extreme ideology, can be justified if you have enough bad information on your hands. For example, if you actually do believe that the election is being stolen from Trump back in January 6th, storming the Capitol feels like a pretty defensible revolutionary action. With the Nazi stuff, if you believe all the shit they say about Jews and race science and stuff, once you have all those preconditions locked in, then you can get people to do a lot of really bad shit that you would call evil, but to them is the only way to save their people. That's why so often the battle for good morals is actually a battle over empirical truth, and why the right's current inability to adhere to anything approximating reality is really, really worrying. It's not about people being made more evil. It's about people being made to accept premises that justify evil behavior. It's important to understand that, or you'll never be able to push back against this stuff.
Absolve them. Their humanity doesn't absolve them. Their humanity condemns them for.
So I completely relate to this frustration that folks are shocked about the fact that racists aren't, some separate breed or species that, are easily identified by, tentacles or something. Like I totally relate to that feeling. At the same time, when I was reading your description of these lives, what struck me was not necessarily that they were so average, but there were some ways in which it did feel very atypical. A lot of the guys that you described, you talk at length about describing the incel movement, involuntary celibates, that a lot of these men have very little in the way of kind of romantic or social infrastructure in their lives at all. You describe one guy making dinner and that he makes the same kind of, it was kind of a bizarre, very imbalanced meal of like pork and beans or something every single night.
No, canned beef and pineapples.
Canned beef. Oh yes, it was beef and like canned beans and then a swig of pineapple juice to break it up, I guess, so he doesn't get scurvy. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh.
Why does BGR sound so condescending to me? Am I just biased? I don't think Briahna Joy Grace sounds condescending here. I think this is just her normal tone.
Oh, well, in some ways it's banal because he's like a guy making dinner every night. But in other ways, the details of his life point to someone who is
autistic?
Not a functioning member of society and has a lot of other things going on. That led me not to say it absolves him of any way, because there are a lot of poor people who aren't obviously white supremacists. In fact, obviously disproportionately, poor people in America are not white at all. But
are we talking about poverty here or like neuroatypical behavior? I don't know what poverty has to do with this pineapple bean swig thing that she was talking about. That seems to me more like being kind of maybe a little smidge autistic. Yeah, it could be poverty plus mental illness. There's always going to be that intersectional consideration.
It did. I gotta confess, it did make me not feel empathy for the person, but it made me say this is a tension point for political radicalization. Like, this is an opportunity to provide something that could lead this person to want to make different kinds of choices. If in fact part of what's driving him to be a white supremacist are these other aspects of his life that seem very unpleasant and bad, and that no one should be dealing with and living like. And I wonder if there was ever, I mean, it's difficult because it is difficult to talk about this without feeling like you're letting people off the hook for their loathsome behaviors. But in a practical way, I guess as someone who doesn't see a lot of utility in telling people that they are bad, as changing their mind. Like if I thought it worked to just be like Nazism is horrible and you shouldn't be a Nazi, then I'd be like, yes, we should just put that on every bridge and tunnel in America and that would solve the problem.
I mean, I say we give.
So I don't agree with what Briahna said there because it seems like she's missing the point a little bit. So on one hand, yes, just telling people they're bad doesn't really work, but that's not really what Talia is talking about, is it? Talia is talking about holistic social condemnation. Up to and including the point of violence, you know? So I don't know if Briahna is necessarily addressing that in its totality here. Yeah, we'll see how she responds.
Give that a shot. Like, I mean, honestly, like if people showed up en masse every time there was a right-wing march, if people bothered to do that, instead of deciding that the pragmatic approach is sympathy for the devil.
Well, again, I wouldn't characterize it as sympathy for the devil, but
okay, I don't like that binary right here. I actually explicitly disagree with this right here. The sympathy for the devil thing. Having sympathy for Nazis has nothing to do, there's no correlation between that and fighting against them politically in whatever reasonable way. Having sympathy for something doesn't mean you're any less insistent in condemning or challenging it. Wait, why is the door open? No, she's dumb. She's dumb. Pigeon's dumb. Anyway, like, yeah, I feel like they're both talking past each other really, really hard here. Once we finish this video, we'll play Psychonauts. I want to see how this pans out, though. I wouldn't mind. I try... Guys, I gotta say, I'm feeling very enlightened right now. For a supreme patrician such as myself to step on in here, really disliking Briahna Joy Gray, but both siding this conversation, I feel enlightened, you know? Maybe I'm truly unaffected by spite. Maybe my brain is just operating on a whole other level right now. That'd be nice. I don't like spite as a concept.
But are those things mutually exclusive? Is showing up to a right-wing march the way, you know, Antifa and some groups do? And there are often counter-protests. You know, is that mutually exclusive with saying there needs to be long-term de-radicalizers, people like, you know, Daryl Davis, who we brought up on this podcast many times before, who do engage in that more long-term effort, and, you know, people
Daryl
who
Davis
politically...
A good counterpoint, by the way. Briahna Joy Gray just said what I said. Does this need to be the dichotomy? Can't these both happen?
Person. Daryl Davis is also one man. Shannon Foley Martinez is another example of someone who works with formers. But again, this is not scalable. These are years long, immensely intimate, emotional stuff. I think if you want social policies that make life less of a hideous, precarious ladder over an abyss, fine. But know that every one of these people is going to fight you every step of the way of implementing these policies, because they will go to people of color too.
Okay. So, we're talking about like 3 different things now, okay? Briahna Joy Gray is talking about sympathizing with Nazis enough to understand the socio-political conditions that lead to them being what they are. Whereas Talia is talking about the non-functionality of interpersonal de-radicalization and the importance of holistic social rejection. But now Talia has brought up the idea of having Nazis around with you as like a political ally to push for Medicare for all or whatever. The thing is, there aren't that many Proud Boys in America. If you took all the members of all far-right organizations in America together, you'd probably end up with what? I mean, you'd be lucky to get 0.1%, right? Maybe not even that. This isn't like a huge political bloc. I don't know if Briahna Joy Gray is saying, like, we need to be sympathetic to Nazis so we can get them to vote for Bernie Sanders. So unless that was brought up earlier in this discussion, I don't know where that's coming from Talia.
So like, why is it an individual act?
What are you even advocating for?
Well, let's try to figure that out, Talia. What I'm curious about is, why is it an individual act when someone like Daryl Davis does what he does? For those who don't remember, Daryl Davis is a black man who,
I remember this,
famously has a number of like Klan robes in his closet, because every time he talks a Klan member out of being in the Klan, they like to give him a robe, and he's like the great and clan whisperer. And he's also apparently a very renowned jazz musician. But
I've heard mixed stuff from Daryl Davis that, like, sometimes the benefits of his behavior is widely overstated because we want to believe in the idea that anyone can be de-radicalized, and sometimes things get, like, bowled over a little bit. I don't know the specifics on that. I do know that, like, as a project, it's pretty cool to, like, make people not Nazis,
It's interesting to me to see it as an individual act when it's Daryl Davis, but not an individual act when an individual decides to put brass knuckles on and punch a Nazi. And what I'm questioning is the scalability. The reason I'm questioning it is because I think a lot of people aren't going to feel able or safe to do the Nazi punching, right? So it doesn't seem to me. I would say, like, why not both? If you are adherent to Nazi punching, I mean, great. I mean, like, fine. I'm certainly not arguing against that, but I am concerned about saying that we want to minimize the potential.
Yeah, the KKK chapter he supposedly broke up immediately reformed, like, right after, led by someone he supposedly de-radicalized. Yikes. If that's true, Jesus. That's not great. You have an article on that?
Effects of doing the alternative approach. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about that, Talia, is because you have an exposure to what it's like to be in those spaces and potentially some insights that other folks who haven't engaged in that project don't have. And I'm curious to pick your brain about whether or not, for example, when you're on these dating sites, have you ever engaged in any kind of conversations that tried to see what would happen if you raised doubts about being a white supremacist, or, brought up, well, there's this one Black person at work who's okay, and sometimes, what are those kind of conversations like?
Those conversations, incel spaces bar women, like, the whitedate.net is whitedate.net. Like, what, I'm supposed to write to people who are talking about, like, the evil Marxists and darkies and say, like, actually, like, Black people aren't so bad after all. I mean, honestly, if I had known that this was going to be an extended conversation about the utility of de-radicalization versus anti-fascism, I would absolutely have not agreed to be on this podcast, because I've gotten this banal question over and over and over again, and
there's no getting around it. I'm trying not to let this bias my opinion of their arguments, but Talia is being kind of an asshole. I'm trying to just fixate on the arguments here, but she does seem to have a pretty bad attitude towards this, which isn't great.
Loathe it at this point. Like, people, like, I mean, I understand coalition building and desires, but, like, I find it that, like, most people aren't capable of engaging in, like, with this level of, like, being in those spaces is fucking, like, dipping your head in acid. And I did it for a year and a half. I wouldn't ask anyone else to do it. And I wouldn't expose myself to emotional intimacy with those people on a real level, like, not through the mask of an avatar. I don't, like, I wouldn't, I mean, maybe because I'm a Jew, I wouldn't wind up radicalized in the same way, but, like, anyone is susceptible to propaganda. Like asking people to, like imbibe white supremacist propaganda and engage in emotional intimacy with white supremacists, which is what de-radicalization entails, a deep emotional intimacy of years-long relationships of talking, conversation, and, like,
I feel like we're skipping over so many, like, shades of gray between the white and the black here, right? Like, de-radicalization is only being talked of in the context of, like, forming deep interpersonal friendships with full-on neo-Nazis that take years and years and years, But, like, what about broader de-radicalization? Like these incel forums, for example. You know what I mean? Like, not every person in those incel forums is like a armory, like an armory building, like, crazy Proud Boy dude in real life. A lot of them are probably just miserable dipshits. And I feel like there are ways of affecting. So should we send women into the incel groups? No! I'm not saying you have to, like, send minorities into a furnace, like for coal for the engine. Jesus. I guess you can if you want to, but no. I'm saying that there are ways to affect de-radicalization that aren't just deep interpersonal friendships. So then who? Well, I don't know. What if you had YouTubers whose job it was to debate the demagogues who led people down those political roads, so that when those demagogues lose those debates, a lot of their followers then take a look at the content of the person who won and think more favorably of it. Just a suggestion. Just a possible maybe. I guarantee you, and this is just because of the way the size of my platform works, that I've probably participated in the de-radicalization of more Nazis than 100, 1,000 interpersonal friendship havers could ever do, because I have a huge platform. So maybe we should affect change on levels like that and invest a little bit more in ways of de-radicalizing that involve the most important element of radicalization and de-radicalization: social circles. Social circles matter more than anything else. Why do people fall into the far right? Well, it could have been like a million things, but why do they stay in the far right? Because those are the only friends they have left. The farther right you are, the more you adopt their terminology, their language, and their attitudes. And when you spend all your time in Nazi circles, you don't get along with normies anymore, because your jokes are incredibly off-putting to them. So the only friends they have left are people in the far right, and you get isolated. And then you realize, now that you're in that deep, even if you wanted to change your political perspective, you can't, because you could never be accepted back into mainstream society. This is how these far right groups get you. They give you a whole different set of terminology to adopt. Think of the incels. The incel forums aren't about giving way to lonely young men. They're about keeping those young men lonely by forcing them to adopt misogynistic and self-hating worldviews that make them intolerable to average people, by forcing them to adopt and use terminology that's off-putting to people not in those cultish circles. In doing so, they ensure these people have nowhere to turn but these forums, because your average black-pilled incel isn't able to go into more normie forums and talk about their problems there, because they're, at this point, deeply misogynistic, and they use language that makes them sound like a fucking alien trying to communicate with humans. If you understand stuff like that, you can combat these factors. You can do it by creating... I know that Innuendo Studios has a video on it. It's a very good video. You can do this by creating online spaces that are firmly left-wing, but have a little bit of flexibility when it comes to accepting some edgier stuff that might pull in people who aren't left-wing. You can do this by directly engaging with the leaders of their movements and making them look silly, or by mocking and ridiculing elements of their behavior and ideology. This is why ContraPoints is so often regarded as an architect of de-radicalization. ContraPoints videos are easy to watch and fun, so anyone's going to want to watch them just based on their quality, but also, ContraPoints is edgy. For God's sake, ContraPoints' logo has trap in it. Have you guys ever noticed that? Not an accident, by the way, and people have gotten mad at her for that. Really? Yeah, it's right down there in the bottom right of every single one of her videos. And I think it's funny. I think it's funny. And I bet you there are a lot of people much farther to the right of me who also think it's a little bit funny, you know? ContraPoints constantly makes self-debasing jokes that kind of poke fun at herself in a way. Make fun of herself a little bit for being a woman. Or for being trans, you know? She does it in a way that invites the attention and the scrutiny of people who disagree with her. Here's a good example. How many times has Contra made a joke talking about herself and saying she's a bio girl? It's like every video, right? Delightful jokes. I think they're funny, on their own, well-timed and well-paced. But they also invite certain types of people with certain types of ideas to comment, don't they? Or at the very least to pay attention. She's often not outwardly harsh to the people who may disagree with her on this stuff. In fact, many of Contra's videos concede ideas to the right that they think form the crux of left-leaning arguments. ContraPoints has made comments talking about how she knows there are differences between men and women. She knows there are differences between the bodies of trans women and cis women. Nothing that she's saying there is necessarily needed to make the point she's making in those videos. But why are they important to gather the audiences she wants to gather? It's because she's making a subtle effort to invite and to disarm people who aren't necessarily on the left. It's brilliant stuff. There's a reason I like her so much. Now, everything that I'm talking about right now, in my mind, pound for pound, dollar for dollar, is the most effective way to de-radicalize. You know? Now, I have failed utterly in this project because at this point, I am a very well-known and well-hated left-leaning pariah. And okay, you know, The chips fall where they may. May others rise in the wake of my ashes. Fine. But ideologically, I still support the project, and I'll supplement it however I can. That's what we need to be talking about. So for de-radicalization to only be talked about in this direct, threatening, interpersonal way, I think we're leaving out a big component of the conversation. You guys get what I'm talking about, right?
Like, yes, that is inherently more personal than a punch in the face. You know, like, I've done some crazy shit. Like, I mean, even after the book, like around the election, I was, you know, undercover and like the 3% Georgia's security force, like walkie-talkie channel. I had a false identity. I had a false face. I did over an hour-long interview. I had a backstory, emotions. I talked to people. You know, it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's fine. But I had a mask. I had the protection of a lie to cover me. If I had just been naked to those sentiments, like, I don't know that I would have even gotten through it. Like, it was hard enough as it was. Like, this stuff is aqua regia. These conversations.
Vosh, I still get so many people all the time saying they found your vids through me shitposting with you and moved left because of them, Lamau. Well, I guess I'll see you on the hippy dippy in 2 days, huh, Shu? 3 days? 3 days. I'll see you there. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, Shu is also a powerful architect of this type of behavior. Yeah, I saw the links in chat. The whole Daryl Davis, failed thing. Yeah. Whatever.
That take place in Nazi chat rooms, these conversations that take place on these forums are poison. They are poison, and they are perpetual emotion machines of radicalization. So yeah, like, maybe, I mean, and if you went in and you said like, hey, like, knock it off, don't talk about immigrants that way, you just be kicked out, and they'd anyway.
I don't know that that's what I said, Talia, but that characterization aside, I totally understand and would never ask anybody to engage in de-radicalization either. I mean, I've had this conversation in other contexts where, you know, there's a certain strain, for example, of political discourse among a lot of kind of Black liberals that will say, it's not my job to teach you about racism. You know, it's, you educate yourself, pick up a book, you know, that kind of lingo, which is fine. It's extremely taxing. I've spent my entire life as Black women in predominantly white spaces being called upon to do exactly that. And it is sometimes tiresome. I remember thinking in law school at a certain point, somebody should be paying me a professor's salary instead of asking me to pay the institution, because of all the work I'm doing with my classmates after class ends, explaining to them this crap that the teachers in many respects aren't qualified to cover, even though it's directly germane to the material. So I certainly empathize with that. But I also wouldn't ask any individual to engage in a physical altercation with the Nazi. I'm not asking anybody to do anything. What I'm trying to explore is the potential political utility of different kinds of options and to assess how effective de-radicalization actually is. I'm not making a claim or an argument right now. What I'm trying—
It is true. To her credit, I don't think Briahna Joy Gray has even implied any, like, normative statements. She really has just been indicating that she wants to discuss the possibility of different types of de-radicalization being effective. It's not like I don't even think she's implied any offense at Talia at the moment. Unless I missed it, it seems like she's been fairly good faith in this conversation.
Trying to do is have a conversation about what the limitations of various approaches are, so we as a community can figure out the best way to go forward.
I mean, I am just curious why you would ask a militant anti-fascist to talk about the utility of de-radicalization. This seems like a setup for frustration for both of us.
Well, you know,
what about being a militant anti-fascist is anathema to believing in de-radicalization? De-radicalization is anti-fascist. How many Americans are fascist or fascist adjacent? Tens of millions, but you want to flatten all their nose bridges? De-radicalization is the bulk of anti-fascist work. I just don't agree with this false dichotomy.
I certainly am not intending to frustrate you, and I'm not so frustrated. I mean, I think it's interesting. I'm asking you the questions that naturally raised in my mind when I read your book. Is there some aspect of the book that you would prefer to talk about? I mean, we haven't really talked in detail about what the book actually lays out, so I want to give you an opportunity to tell the audience what you think the biggest takeaway is and why you think that they should read it, what it is in fact about, what your goals were in writing it.
My goal was to make people aware of the perniciousness of the threat, make people aware of some of the ideological bases and the emotional bases that radicalization rests on. My encouragement was specifically to uplift the anti-fascist movement and to encourage people to become active anti-fascists, militant anti-fascists. It is explicitly a book endorsing action of all kinds, including from behind the keyboard and in the streets, to head this radicalization, this radicalized movement of people who want to kill people that look like me and my family and people who look like you and your family, and head them off at the pass and to fight as urgently as they are fighting.
Hey, YouTube, don't forget.
Hello. Huh. Well, I'm going to be honest with you guys. Coming into this, I really did not expect to end up mostly agreeing with Briahna, but, you know, that's how life is, I suppose. You know, I try not to come in with the worst biases. I can't believe they still have Virgil, Texas on this banner. They've got to, like, 1984 this guy and just quietly move her to the center of the banner. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, dear. I didn't. Does anyone have the Twitter clip specifically that people got really mad over? I retweeted it. The one where the one where Briahna Joy Gray tried to, well, like, I should be just as mad because I'm black or whatever. Does anyone have that clip? It's from after the interaction. Please procure it for me. Does anyone actually believe this person's ever been to fight? It's amazing how people who've never been to fight talk so casually about punching people. This is not movies or video games. Someone is not going to stand there and let you punch them. Violence shouldn't be talked about so flippantly, because once it starts, it will not be easy in the end. You might find may not be the one ending it either. I do think it is a little bit pointed that when people on the far right talk about punching their enemies, these are usually like ex-military, ex-police, thick-neck, bald-head chuds who's like who have like 40 pounds of muscle like on either end of their neck, you know? And when people on the left do it, they're usually like waifish college students. I'm not saying that's not like a moral claim. That's not a moral argument. I'm just saying that it is interesting how the advocacy for violence on the right does. I mean, there are far more like legitimate right-leaning militia groups than they are left-leaning militia groups, you know? How can you know that? I know that because I have literally never seen a left-leaning person call for violence while having 20 pounds of muscle on either end of their neck. I know that simply through deductive reasoning, because I have never seen a left-leaning person do it, and I have seen right-leaning person do it. So, Azan doesn't do that, though, does he? Okay, let me just... This is the clip that, like, I saw first.
Because I do...
Let me see.
Think that I was holding back, frankly, from saying some...
Sorry, that's not deductive, that's inductive, whatever.
...things that I do believe, which is that I do think that some of the way that white people approach race, and some black people, frankly, a lot of affluent black people, is performative. I think that some of the anger, like, there's...
So, point by point, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Yes, there are a lot of people who talk about race in a highly performative way. Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that.
No reason why someone like Talia should be more angry at a Nazi than me. And so the certain degree of it, to me, and maybe this isn't fair, comes off as self-righteousness. Like, you don't get to be madder at racists than me.
Okay, this still is incredibly dumb. So there's one point of this that is not dumb, and several other points that are very dumb, and it kind of eclipses with the dumb. So I'll go over it point by point.
Reason why someone like Talia should be more angry at a Nazi than me.
The reason Talia can be more angry at Nazis than you is because you do a podcast, and Talia did de-radicalization work for years and directly participates in anti-fascist organization. So this might be a matter of proximity beyond anything else.
And so the certain degree of it, to me, and maybe this isn't fair, comes off as self-righteousness.
There are elements of Talia's behavior that came off as self-righteous, but I do feel it's a little bit bad faith to dismiss her broader concerns simply with that, you know?
Like, you don't get to be madder at racists than me.
They're not just racist, though. They're anti-Semites. And Talia's Jewish, right? This kind of feels like... Doesn't this feel a little bit like doing Oppression Olympics, but like in a way that's supposed to be against Oppression Olympics, but it's still Oppression Olympics? You know what I mean? Like, you shouldn't be doing Oppression Olympics, and then you pull out the oppression abacus to calculate if you have the oppression points to say that. I don't know.
Now, if you are more angry than I am, that has to do with your personality, your own cognitive makeup.
Yeah, I really don't like this.
And you are entitled to that anger. right? But you have to understand that that's an individual. You are an individual operating as an individual, but you can't generalize about what we should do as a community based off of your personal predilections. Do you know what I'm saying?
So the reason why this is really bad and really dumb, so I guess even if Briahna, I guess, handled that part of the interview okay, her anger afterwards, the problem isn't the anger. There's nothing wrong with anger. The phrase blinded by anger, the problem there isn't the anger, it's the blinding. If you believe that Talia's perception on this is affected by personal bias, or that anger is clouding their ability to reasonably assess anti-fascist action, you should impugn the unreasonability, not the anger itself. Especially when you're opening with like a who gets to be more mad at Nazis thing. In my opinion, we all get to be equally mad at Nazis. I think that a Jewish person and a non-Jewish person have equal right to be angry at Nazis, because I think their moral crimes are it's as close to objectively disgusting as any moral statement can get, you know. So I think we all have a right to do that.
Sure.
And so you are individually entitled.
Yeah, so this is the clip that I saw, and from this clip, I thought that the interview must have gone terribly. But I'll amend my position. I think that Briahna is responding poorly to controversy here, and this exacerbated a lot of that controversy, by the way. However, in the context of the actual conversation, I think that I may be more partial to Brianna's perspective. So now we know. I'm actually glad we found this out. It's important to see the whole thing. Vosh, is that true, though? Would you say everyone should be equally mad at a murderer, even if the murdered person was your son? I don't think there's any, like, reason why anyone should get to be more mad about anything than anyone else, you know? I don't know. It's likely that a person whose son was murdered will be more angry, but if another person is even more angry than that, like, what's the big deal? Who cares? If it's a bad thing, why not be angry? Also, murderers do a direct bad thing at a person, but the political beliefs of Nazis affect all of us, some more so than others. But I think, what is the utility in getting mad at people for being angry at Nazis more than they should be? Where are we? Where it's, look, there are arguments that people on the left should be having with each other, and that is very far below any other possible argument that you could ever imaginably have, you know. Looks like Talia doesn't approve of your method of de-radicalization, Omega lol. Oh no. Well, no wonder she didn't respond to my fucking DM. Shock the idiot who platforms Nazis constantly is now saying homosexual degenerates will corrupt your precious children. I'm talking about Vush, the man who loves a good, honest debate about the Jewish question. Well, never mind. We don't have to be nice anymore. All right, yeah. I think this person does a disservice to anti-fascist activism by explicitly making it mutually exclusive to de-radicalization. The unfollow. That's as bad as it gets. Yeah, now it's personal. Now we can do it. Yep, sorry. I can't believe we're siding with Briahna on something, but geez. When did you say gay people corrupt children? This was from my take that, like, a part of Pride shouldn't have overt sex acts so that it's considered family friendly. And all the very reasonable interlocutors stepped up to say, well, if it should be family friendly, then maybe we should just ban black people then. Very excellent, high quality discourse stemmed from that. From people who, by the way, have never been to a pride parade themselves. You know why? You know how I could tell? Because they don't touch grass. And pride parades are held outdoors generally. Wait, anyway, why are people all like this, dude? It's better for the most destructive conspiracy theory of the last few centuries to go unchallenged, actually. Thank you, person who probably follows me. I love you too. You amazingly don't have to invite anti-Semites into a big spotlight to seem nice and reasonable in order to refute Nazism. But they don't seem nice and reasonable. Have you ever watched a debate of mine? When have I talked with an anti-Semite who came off nice and reasonable? The explicit point of debating them is to point out that they're not reasonable, and usually when you point that out, they start being not nice. They look like angry fools. A person, like, when you make statements like this, I don't think you have a right to talk about de-radicalization. Click show replies I want to see. Show replies where? I'm always like a little hesitant to dig too far to Twitter because I don't know if it's gonna be like, because you can just fucking post porn on Twitter if you want. It's one reply. Oh, cool. So you haven't watched it. True. When you force anti-Semites to state their actual beliefs, it becomes very hard for them to sound nice and reasonable. True. He does it because it makes money. Dude, what a non-argument. Okay, so you lay out points. Those points are challenged. Well, he only does this thing that I can't prove is bad because it makes money. Stop assuming content creators are noble and selfish because they make money you like to rot your brain to. Personally, I think it's very problematic for this person to say that it's wrong for a left-leaning, queer, neuroatypical getting the bag for the work they do, okay? Honestly, do they not want me taking money from advertisers who give money to Google? Jesus. What do you want it going to? The Daily Wire? Somebody's got to take that ad revenue money. All right. Well, now that we've watched the totality, now that we've watched everything, and now that we know the biases of Talia, I can say this unequivocally, all right? Briahna Joy Gray won that conversation, and anybody whose understanding of anti-fascism is limited exclusively to LARPing about punching people in the streets, and not actually understanding the methods of de-radicalization through the myriad systems that we have the ability to use through modern technology, is really doing a disservice to the movement. God, I hate Briahna so much, though. Don't worry, there's plenty of other stuff she does and says you can get mad at her over, okay? Oh, by the way, Ryan, when this goes on the main channel, okay, the title will be Briahna Joy Gray, ... was right? Question mark, exclamation point, and I can do, you can do that. You can do, just absolutely lay it up. Oh, hey, Tempest. Howdy.